D&Ders, RPGers, Game Masters, and such. Today I'm going to talk about 2d6 skill checks, all right? And the first question you're going to ask yourself is, why? Why is he doing this? All right, first of all, I have gone through 3d6 skill checks. I have also gone through using 1d20 as a skill check. I have also extensively talked about 1d6 skill checks and said this was how it was, or this is how it should be, okay? Now I'm going to talk about 2d6 skill checks. And I guess I'm going to pull mostly from delving deeper. But I know that Traveler and Stars Without Number use the concept of 2d6 to do a skill check, right? And I kind of see why they do it, okay? And I'm going to speak about my personal experience that happened last Saturday night. So first of all, I like White Box a lot. I like Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game by Charlie Mason. And he does the skill checks based on this column right here. Let's say this is the thief skills, right? So if you have a number here, you have to roll less than that number or less on a 1d6, okay? This came out with James Spahn using the White Box Omnibus. He has lore, forestry, these are different things that you see using the same concept. If you see a number, you have to roll that number or less on a 1d6, okay? White Star, once again, uses the same thing. They have skills that came out, I think, in the Galaxy Edition especially. And, you know, all these things use the same concept. You roll less than the number that's indicated. Well, here's the caveat, because there is some. If you think about it, 1d6, 3d6, and 1d20, all the concepts are the same. You roll lower than the number, and that's supposed to be better, and that screws everybody up at the table. I don't care. I mean, I've been doing this for years, and it's the same thing. We roll lower? I'm like, yeah, it's the same thing we did 2 weeks ago. I don't understand why they... And I get it. It's not part of the human psyche to think that lower is better, right? So it's just not... You don't want a low IQ. You want a high IQ. You know, it's like this thing, you know? You want to jump high. You don't want to jump low. So I get it. It makes sense. Second problem is that, especially one of my things with the 1d6, if you get bonuses, you have to put the bonus on the target number, not the number you're rolling. Or if you have a +1 for your strength, you have to subtract it from your roll. It's really confusing if you think of it like that. So here's an example. Let's say a normal hard check is a 2d6. If my strength is now 18, I get a +1. It would be a 3 out of 6, which means I roll 3 or less. It's counterintuitive. I hate to say it, it truly is. I don't know, people have problems with it. Last part is it can be very binary, especially if you're using a 1d6. It's either success or failure, all right? And so when I introduce this next thing, you can have degrees of success and degrees of failure. So here's something to think about. Like I said, I tried it. It was highly successful. So maybe it's worth it to try it on your table, right? So why even use them at all? That came up with one of my things on the 1d6. And Diego Rodriguez put it best. He says, there is a reason why modern games use skill checks. Skill checks are one of the things that make the game fair. It already exists in the first iteration of the hobby, just in different manners. Don't know why people don't like skill checks in OSR games. I know, I kind of like them. It takes the pressure off me being the bad guy. You just roll. Oh, you failed. I guess it didn't happen. You know what I'm saying? So here's a couple of examples. Obviously, you know what a skill check is, but in an OSR game, some fighter's trying to climb up, right? And he's carrying 3 large sacks of coins. And what happens is I just let the dice determine the fail. I don't have to tell him, oh, you can't do that. It's too heavy. Just have him fail. Roll, you failed. That's it. Maybe he's lucky. Man, maybe he can do it, right? It can also take some of the characters in OSR game, and that's why people like 5e. You have a very unique character, like a paladin comes in with a high charisma. That's not, you have a high charisma as a paladin. What do you do with that? It means for loyalty and men, I get it. But suppose you want to get a whole town to rally behind you to go on a quest. All right, or charm the king into having you give you more money, you know, be very persuasive about things. I mean, it's kind of a fun way of doing it if they roll properly, right? And some people say, well, you can always use a saving throw. Well, sometimes they don't totally correlate. And let me explain to you why. So suppose I have 4 characters in a room and they're all fighters, right? They all do a saving throw. But let's say Tord has a unusually low constitution. Let's say everything makes him sick. So he has a minus on his roll, and it can be specific towards something going on. It just varies it up a little bit that you can have a little more fun with it, okay? That's kind of what we're here for, right? And the last one, sometimes it takes the whole pressure off you on producing an answer. Or maybe it makes it harder to produce multiple answers. But for example, you have a Whitebeard the mage attempts to understand the mechanism of clockwork, and you're just like, well, it's really hard for you to understand, so you're going to have to roll and see how high you score, how much I'm going to tell you, right? Now, going with the same theory, I was looking at my wife are doing out here doing an experiment. We kind of gave up our smartphone, so I started going back and reading through things. So here it is, delving deeper. Somebody told me about reading this, and it's actually a really good read. And they say rolling a throw of a 5 or 6 on a 6-sided dice, or a 3 through 6. So actually, it's always rolling up in here, which is interesting. Well, I think that, I did not notice that until I was reading it for the second time. But I also noticed they use 2d6 for a lot of things. Who would have thunk it? I'm going to go through different cases where it's used, right? You can get this for free. There's a link. The link to this whole slide thing is in the description. So if you want to click on this and look at all these slides and then go down and click the link for Immersive Link. Immersive Ink has this thing for free for you to look at, but the book's only $5 on Lulu or something like that. Totally worth it to get. It's a great read. I like it a lot, actually. So this is the 1974 incarnation of, original Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, and what they did was took the rules from Chainmail, mashed it into the Little Brown books, and they kind of put it together, right? So it's kind of what they did, right? So let's take a look. First case, page 53. I'm not going to open up and read because I put it right here for you to look at, right? This is a 2d6 chart on reaction check, right? With monsters. It can either go from hostile to enthusiastic. In this case, the higher the number, the better the reaction. But there's 5 different levels of reaction: hostile, negative, uncertain, positive. And uncertain's the one in the middle, which is kind of interesting, right? So you get negative, but hostile is like really bad, right? So it kind of gives you a varying degree of, how would you say, response to things. Stars Without Number does this too. I think it's really kind of interesting. Here's page 57, morale checks. Here's your guys. What do they do if you roll a 2? They surrender. They suck. 3 to 5, they just flee, run off, and leave you, right? 6 to 8, they stand or hold off. 9 to 11, press for advantage. And 12 or more, they attack for you to the end, right? Because, you rolled really high. It makes sense, right? Another example of just looking at the morale check, you have modifiers that are put into it based on what you're dealing with. Orcs, goblins, ghouls, whatever it is, right? So it can take a modifier pretty easily, because it's a bigger range of numbers than, let's say, a 1d6, okay? Here's the next instance. This is wilderness weather conditions. The best conditions are in the middle, because it's a bell curve compared to either really hot or hard rain, okay? Instance 4, this thing is with weather ship speed. Once again, in the middle, it's a lot nicer than on the ends. This one has a storm, and this one has dead calm. You can't move anywhere, right? And the last instance I'm showing you is something flying. Once again, the best conditions are in the middle. The worst are on the fringes. Now, let's take a look at this. They're putting together this concept of 2d6, and you get a nice, juicy bell curve. The best conditions for this, with the ones that were going on, were towards the middle, all right, for some of them. And then you got to think about the reaction rules. This one was the most uncertain. It's like 50-50. It could be good, could be bad. The DM decides. These were always good, and these were always bad. It's the way they kind of did reaction rules. All right, so you're going to see something where you put this into use, right? So I saw this cartoon. I still don't understand it. Always go for this. Never go for this. Only villains do that. I don't get it. But as far as things go, it varies from very bad to half, 50-50. Then it goes good, and then it goes very good, right? If we look at the dice roll here, right, the percentage of things, like 1/6 of the dice are going to come up 7, the dice rolls, right? So this also means that 58% of the dice rolls go 7 and above, and 58% of the dice roll goes 7 and below, right? So it's kind of a weird way this chart's set up, okay? To really understand it, you just kind of look at the numbers, okay, of what's going on. So if you roll a 2, 100% of the dice rolls are going to be either a 2 or higher. That's what this means. And only one's going to be 2.7. Only 2.7% pretty much are going to be a 2, right? Likewise, on the bottom end of this kind of makes sense. So let's say you had to roll a 5. Let's say you have a +3 on something, okay? And you want to roll an 8, which is success, okay? That means the odds of rolling a 5 or higher is 83.33%. I've worked the numbers. That's how it works out. So the odds of you screwing this up, right, rolling, let's say, the lower end is going to be 16.7. That was without hitting a 5. It's kind of a weird way this chart's set up, okay? So But you don't really have to know the stats to know it's kind of easier to roll a 5 and above than it is to roll below a 5. Because below a 5 would be 4, 3, 2, right? It only gives you a couple options. So if you look at this chart right here, you can always take this like 1. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rolls out of possible 36 would be below a 4 or below, right? It's just a nice way of looking at this, okay? If you add your percentages up, you would get what's up here in this chart. Like, I think I'm convoluting this too much that it really needs to be, but the idea behind a nice bell curve like this, it sets you up for this next thing down here. Now, I admit I took this from Tech Findings. I'll show you what it looks like. But if you wanted to augment your game, like this is from Basic Fantasy. I was doing a Gothic thing. I was doing Willow. If you want, that's an interesting module, I guess you might say. I bought it. I actually kind of like it. The gang is enjoying it. It's very sandbox. So we're using Basic Fantasy numbers, where 18 is a +3, 16, 17 is +2, and this is a +1, right? I like to vary it up a little bit. It keeps it interesting. And you can have the walk downhill from here. So when they do skill checks, they can add up to this. Before, if you're using 1d6, you can't have a +3. It breaks the skill system thing because a 6-sided dice doesn't have enough in it to actually cushion the blow. So this way, if they have a +3 and they have to roll an 8, that means 5 is going to be the breakoff for doing well. And believe me, they don't hit it. They didn't hit it that often. No one really had a 3. I think the highest they had was a bunch of 2s. So this is something to consider when you're gaming, to make it a little different when doing a skill check. Now, like I said, you have to try it, and you have to have some kind of buy-in. It was easy for my group to buy into it. They just, oh, wow, it's just rolling higher is better on a 2d6. And I show them the thing. Oh, what's your wisdom? Oh, that's a +1. So that means you just have to roll a 7, and it's going to give it. If not, if you roll a 6, it's going to be kind of 50-50. We don't know what's going to happen. So it made it a little more fun. I think they understood it better. Something to give it a try. Please go down to the comments and tear into this thing. If you don't like it, that's fine. I'd like to hear your input. All right. So with that, have a good day. Game on.